Pitch on the way to Garvey. Hit high to right center field. Way back. Going. In it. Gone. The Padres win it.
It's time for the 10th inning.
Gibson swings and a fly ball to deep right field. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable.
Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Look at me. I can be center field.
Hello, and welcome to the 10th inning. I'm Nick Mattos, and I host a sports talk show on KSRO in Sonoma County, Sundays from 4 to 6 p.m. And today we're going to break down the National League Divisional Series between the San Francisco Giants and the Chicago Cubs. The San Francisco Giants ended the first half of the season with the best record in baseball and a 7-game lead over their arch rivals, the Los Angeles Dodgers. After the All-Star break, the Giants struggled to win games, unable to put together more than 2 consecutive victories until the final week of the season, winning 5 of their last 6 games. Sweeping the National League West Division champion Dodgers, the season ended with the Giants having 87 victories and 75 losses, 1 game ahead of the St. Louis Cardinals, and earning the second wild card spot and a trip to New York to play an elimination game against the New York Mets. In a pitching duel between the Giants' Madison Bumgarner and the Mets' Noah Syndergaard, better known as Thor, the Giants won on a 3-run home run by third baseman Connor Gillespie in the top of the 9th inning, defeating the Mets 3-0 and earning the Giants a trip to Chicago for the divisional series against the Chicago Cubs, the National League Central Division champions. The Cubs ended the season with 103 victories and only 58 losses, and their home record was stunning, winning 57 games with 24 losses in Wrigley Field. Led by a veteran pitching staff and a starting lineup made of young, talented players, the Giants' goal was to win one of the 2 games in Chicago. Joining us now from San Diego's mighty 1090 is Danny Reiter. Danny was born and raised in Chicago, and Danny has a sports talk show Saturday mornings from 10 to 12:30 on the mighty 1090. Danny, thanks for joining us here on the 10th inning.
Oh, anytime, Nick. You know that.
Well, Dan, I had to get it from a source here from Chicago. You know, we were pretty disappointed in the last games. The Giants blew that lead in the 9th inning there against the Cubs, and we were really hoping that the Giants were going to get to go to Chicago for Game 5. And the Giants' weaknesses, Danny, they kind of just swelled up and showed themselves. They could not close games throughout the whole season. They led the National League with 30 blown saves, and by golly, Danny, Game 4 there, the 9th inning, the Giants had the 3-run lead, and it just blew up for them.
Yeah, it was interesting going into that. I was thinking to myself, you know, if you're the Cubs, 3 runs is doable. You get first couple guys on, you're really going to put some pressure on the Giants, and that's exactly what they did. And you feel bad because I think Bruce Bochy was put in a tough spot there because Matt Moore couldn't go another inning. He had too many pitches. He had pitched masterfully, but he couldn't go any longer. You have your bullpen ready to go, and just none of them, not only could they not get outs, they couldn't throw strikes.
Yeah,
and they were constantly falling behind, 1-0, 2-0, 2-1. You're playing into these hitters' counts where these guys can take pitches or they can get pitches that they want, and it just snowballed on them. And it's unfortunate and it's surprising because, you know, usually when you think of the Giants in the postseason, it's their bullpen that comes through, that they don't have to have a starter go that long, and their bullpen will figure it out, and it just did not happen for them at all in that game.
You're exactly right, Dan, and I believe Matt Moore could have gone one more inning and should have started the 9th inning. He had gone 120 pitches, but the 8th inning, Dan, he went up, three down, and he looked solid. And I can tell you this, I've watched a lot of Giants baseball games, and if that was Madison Bumgarner on the mound, Bruce Bochy would have absolutely started Madison Bumgarner in the 9th inning. Now, if a runner gets on, you go to your bullpen. I believe he had something left in the tank. But, Danny, let's go back to game one. You know, I mentioned in my opening dialogue there that the Giants needed to steal one of the first two games in Chicago. It's a 3-out-of-5 series. You really have to win one of the first two games. Otherwise, you're in elimination game for the next three. And the Giants had done very well throughout the season in elimination games. They set a National League record. I think it's a baseball record, where they ended up winning 10 straight elimination games over a period until they blew that game the other night, Dan. But that first game, game one, Johnny Cueto was on the mound for the Giants, and he was facing John Lester of the Cubs. Both pitchers were the top pitchers in the National League. Lester had 19 victories and 5 losses. Johnny Cueto had 18 victories and 5 losses. And they pitched a heck of a game. It was 0-0 going into the bottom of the 8th inning, where Javier Baez hit a home run. The Giants couldn't muster any runs, and they lost that game 1-0. That was a game I believe the Giants had to win, Dan. With that kind of a pitching performance from Johnny Cueto, that to me seemed like a game that got away.
That was really a tone setter, I felt, that this series wasn't going to be a typical Giants series, because when you get a pitcher's duel like that, that's the way the Giants like to play. They rely on their pitching to keep it low scoring, and they get enough clutch hits to win. And the fact that the Cubs won that game, I remember saying that's huge for the Cubs, because you played the Giants game and you beat them. You went toe-to-toe. You played in a pitcher's duel, and you found a way to win. And I agree. I think that was the big loss for them, because if you want to jump on a team, especially when you're coming out of a wild card game, the first game is always the best one to jump on them. And we saw Toronto do that against Texas, and they never looked back after that. I mean, once they blew them out in the first game, it was over from there. And I think that was a huge win for the Cubs. And the Giants, you knew that they would stick around. It's just the character of the team. It's the character of Bruce Bochy. But when you look back at the game that really defined that series, I'd say it was that, because even if the Cubs don't come back in Game 4, you're still forcing the Giants to win a Game 5 where they're going to have to play Lester again. And he, like we saw in that game, shut him down.
Yeah, he did, Dan. 8 innings, 5 hits, 5 strikeouts, and he didn't walk a single batter. You know, Johnny Cueto outpitched him that game, though. 8 innings pitched, 3 hits, 10 strikeouts, and he didn't walk any batters. The Giants just, I don't know if it was the odds, Dan. You know, the whole second half of the season, the Giants could not put more than 2 consecutive victories in a row until the last week of the season. In the last week of the season, the Giants started playing good ball. They won 5 of 6, sweeping the Dodgers in the last series of the season to gain the wild card spot, and then to go to New York and beat the Mets behind Madison Bumgarner, who absolutely is Mr. October. The guy just steps it up big time when it comes into the playoffs. And get the 3-run homer by, Connor Gillespie to beat the Mets. 6 out of 7 victories, Dan. I just thought to myself, it's hard to win a lot of games in a row in baseball. And if the Giants possibly had got just a couple of runners in scoring position, the game when they lost 1-0 there that night, they really didn't put a lot of pressure on the Cubs. And so anyway, they lose that game, Dan, and they come back the next day, and they're going to play against the National League's ERA leader, the lowest ERA in the National League, Kyle Hendricks, and they're going to they had a huge decision. Would they use Matt Moore or would they use Jeff Samardzija? Now, Jeff Samardzija had pitched for the Cubs, so he obviously was going to be very pumped up to pitch against his old team, and he did not pitch very well. 2 innings, gave up 6 hits, 4 runs. He's out of the game, Dan, after 2 innings. The Giants were in a deep hole right off the bat. But, they battled back. And to the Giants' credit, but Angel Pagan hit a ground ball back to the box, and it had dinged up Kyle Hendricks, hit him in the forearm, and it forced him out of the game. And I thought, okay, now you're getting into the Cubs bullpen. This is the opportunity the Giants need to get back in the game. And for God's sakes, Dan, the Cubs bullpen was lights out. The Giants couldn't get 1 run off of the Cubs in 6 innings. The relief pitching for the Cubs came in, shut the door on the Giants, and the final score was 5-2. And this was the crazy thing about that game, Danny. Kyle Hendricks himself drove in 2 runs before he had to leave the game. And the only other run that the Giants bullpen gave up after Samardzija left the game was a home run by Travis Wood, the pitcher. So the Cubs pitchers, they batted in 3 runs out of the 5, so.
Right, and you look at Game 3, even Jake Arrieta hits a 3-run homer. Sometimes things are just going well for you, and that's how it was for the Cubs pitchers. Maybe they were just getting great pitches to hit because of the pitchers.
Well, Danny, that brings us right into Game 3. The Giants are coming back to AT&T Park. They've got Mad Bum on the mound. He's Mr. October. He had a scoreless streak of innings pitched in the playoffs, which I believe was up to 23 or 24 straight innings without allowing a run. And just as you just mentioned, the home run by the pitcher, Jake Arrieta, a 3-run homer, Danny, puts the Cubs ahead 3-0 early in the game. But the best thing about it was early. I think it was the second inning. Was that correct, Danny? The second inning he hit?
Yeah, second or third. Yeah, it was very early.
Well, the Giants got down, but they battled back. And it was a great game. I really enjoyed that game. Out of all the 4 games, that game to me was the most entertaining because the Giants had to battle back, and their bats had been pretty cold throughout the first couple of games. They weren't able to string together many hits. And sure enough, in Game 3 there, the Giants got some rallies going, and they took the lead there going into the 9th inning, and they took the lead because they scored 4 runs in the 8th inning, okay? They scored 4 runs. I think they were down, was it 3 runs? Excuse me. It was 3 runs. David, do you remember that? Danny, do you remember that? Because I've got a little bit of a brain freeze right now. I think the Giants came up with some runs there in that inning there.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but yeah, I mean, they went in with a 2-run lead into the 9th before Chris Bryan hit the 2-run homer.
Yes, okay.
That was definitely felt like the way that game turned, you thought maybe that was it for the Giants, but they fought back, and yet again they get the clutch hits, and it kind of went back to this thing that does this team lose? And that's what I kept telling people, the Cubs fans that I knew, that I said, look, I mean, the Cubs did everything they could in the first 2 games. They won both of them. They won in separate ways, and that was great, but I had not seen that Giants team get eliminated. And until I wasn't going to bet against them.
Yeah.
And that's the Giants proved it in Game 3, that they are just so hard to kill because they just stuck around in that game. They come back, like you said, they're down early, which frankly, after a 3-run homer off Bumgarner, I thought that was a sign that they were really in some trouble. Fought back. They gave up the lead again in the 9th, but they found a way to win, and you knew the Cubs were in for a battle in Game 4.
Yeah, Danny, that's the exact point that I was trying to make. Is they came back, and here it's coming to me right now. That going into that inning, they were down 3-2. They scored 3 runs to take the 5-3 lead. But here was the key play in that 8th inning. Brandon Crawford was on third base, and the catcher for the Cubs threw a ball down to third base to try to pick off Brandon Crawford, and it hit him in the elbow. And it wasn't his throwing arm. It was his receiving arm. And it hit him pretty badly, Danny, and it dinged up Crawford. He was on the ground for several minutes. He was okay. He stayed in the game. But here was the key, Danny. The Giants had 2 runs in on the inning already, 3 runs in on the inning already. They were up 5-3. There was 1 out, and there was a slow chopper hit towards first base. The first baseman for the Cubs, Rizzo, went over to field the ball, and the pitcher went to cover first. Now, here was the key of the play. When Rizzo lobbed the ball to the pitcher, who was trying to beat the runner to first base, Brandon Crawford should have broke for home, and he did not. The pitcher got the ball, had to run 3 or 4 steps to get to the bag to beat the runner, got to the base just in time to beat the runner, and did not even give any kind of concern or thought to Brandon Crawford. Now, Brandon Crawford, once he saw Rizzo flip the ball to the pitcher who was 3 or 4 steps from the bag, he absolutely should have broke for home. That would have given the Giants the 3rd run to be leading that, to go into that bottom of the 9th. They would have led 6-3 instead of 5-3. And here's what obviously happened. Romo came in, gives up the 2-run homer to Chris Bryant. The game goes 13 innings. The Giants have to use up a lot of their relief pitchers. And the next day in Game 4, Brandon Crawford makes 2 errors that lead to 2 runs. I believe that play, that single play, cost the Giants that game in Game 4. Brandon Crawford normally doesn't make errors. He made one early in the game that led to a run for the Chicago Cubs. And then in the 9th inning, when the Cubs were mounting their furious comeback, there was a ground ball that was hit back to the pitcher. The pitcher turned and threw it to second base. Crawford was on the bag, and when he relayed it to first, Hayward, who had bunted the ball, it was a horrible bunt, was able to get to second base because Crawford threw it a bad throw, and it went by the first baseman belt, and Hayward went to second base and eventually scored the go-ahead and winning run on a base hit up the middle. So whether or not that ball hit Brandon Crawford in his pitching arm, I think his left arm was pretty injured, and it might have had something to do with his play the next day, Danny.
It definitely might have, but I mean, with someone like Crawford, I don't know how many injuries he's played through before. He's one of the best defensive shortstop. I mean, Bruce Bochy knows his team well, and I'm sure they took a look at it, and he must have felt comfortable with him in there. The point you brought up in Game 3, it looks moot in the end because they ended up winning the game, but when you get those plays the balls are put in the infield, it's all instinct of a base runner. So it's almost that fight or flight. And the people who run on contact when it's hit there, those are the ones that score. And it seemed like, the Crawford, maybe he hesitated for a sec, and that slight hesitation there is enough to make it not worth trying to score. Now, he should have known better. He should have probably seen, look, that's a good play there. I'm going to score. But if he takes that second to hesitate, then there's no point in trying to score then because then he's more likely to get thrown out. I mean, when it comes to games like these and series like these, you can always look back at certain plays. But, let's say he doesn't make that error in Game 4 and Hayward gets thrown out. Well, it's still a tie game, and who knows what happens the rest of the game. So it's not one of those for sure they would have won or survived. It's just one of those that would have stopped that situation there. I think in the grand scheme of things, the thing that was killing the Giants was their bullpen. I mean, like we brought up earlier, they couldn't get anyone out, and they couldn't throw strikes. And Bruce Bochy did all he could to try to hide it as much as he could, but it just wasn't enough. And against a lineup like the Cubs, they're going to find ways to get runs aboard. They have too many good hitters, and the big difference for them so far this year and last year is their pitching is so much better, not just in the starters, but as we saw in their bullpen.
Danny, you bring up a good point about the closer for the Giants. The Giants had the best record in the first half of the baseball season. They had done very well, but even in the first half of the season, the Giants' weakness at closer was very apparent. And the Giants did go out and make some moves in the second half. They picked up Matt Moore. They picked up Nunez to play third base. They picked up the relief pitcher Smith. But I don't think management addressed the biggest problem. The biggest problem was a closer. Now, the Cubs went out and they got the best closer in baseball. They went to the New York Yankees, made a deal for Chapman, and Chapman absolutely paid off. Now, do you think the responsibility of getting that closer was the managers, or the managerial didn't perform there, Dan?
It's tough to say with closer. It's everyone wants a Mariano Rivera or a Trevor Hoffman, but those guys don't just happen. A lot of times, I don't want to say closer by committee, but it's guys who come for a little bit, who only have a few good years. There aren't that many guys who do it over long-term success, and the ones that do, like the Francisco Rodriguez, he's never really won anything. When you look at the Giants there, the Cubs, sure, they got Chapman, but that wasn't without its fair share of controversy, especially for his domestic violence issue. So he was kind of a bit of a risk, as good as he is, and he's a flamethrower. I mean, he's got one pitch that he's going to throw, and if you can get the timing right, you can easily come back against him. The Giants, it's one of those things where you can look back on it and okay, they used to have Brian Wilson, they had Sergio Romo, and guys like that, but you don't necessarily have to have a go-to closer going into the playoffs. I mean, even last year, Kansas City Greg Holland had already been hurt. Wade Davis was more of their setup man that they moved into closer, and he had to make that transition. You do need a closer, and it's always going to be one of the most sought-after positions, but you don't necessarily need somebody who you've labeled to be that since the beginning of the year, if you know what I mean. If you can find someone as the postseason goes along, someone who's maybe finding success in that role, and the problem was they couldn't find guys to be successful just normally relieving, not even to say closing.
Yeah, the relief pitching for the Giants was their Achilles heel all season long. And, I want to address one last thing before we let you go, Dan. I wanted to address the ninth inning for the Giants. And the Giants went into that ninth inning with the 5-2 lead. And it looked like, 3 outs and we're going to go to Chicago. We're going to play game 5. I believe the Giants at that point, winning 2 games in a row, would have had the momentum. The pressure would have been on the young Chicago Cubs with everything, all this, pressure from this, haven't won a World Series in a long time. The Giants were in a good position there, and Bochy started the right pitcher to go out in the ninth inning. Derek Law had pitched very well for the San Francisco Giants all season long, and when Derek Law started the ninth inning, Chris Bryant got a base hit. I believe Bochy panicked because he should have left him in there. He had done a fine job, left him in there for at least one more batter. Now, Rizzo was coming up. Rizzo had a horrible series. I believe he ended up with possibly 1 hit and 14 or 15 at-bats. Even if Derek gives up a 2-run homer there, the Giants are still ahead 5-4. But once he pulled Derek Law, then he brought in Javier Lopez. Lopez walks the next batter, which is the cardinal sin. You cannot come out of the bullpen and walk a batter. And I believe that's the last time we're going to see Javier Lopez in a Giants uniform, possibly in a baseball uniform. He had a fine season, but he lost his control. He was not able to get his curveball over the plate. But again, he comes in, he walks the batter, and again, Bochy comes out and takes him out. Bochy had a quick hook. And if you're in the bullpen and you're playing for a coach like that, you're feeling his anxiety. And I believe that Bochy should have been a little more patient with, especially Javier Lopez there, because the next batter up was Ben Zobrist. And Ben Zobrist being a switch hitter, you've got to look to see what he was doing against Javier Lopez in his previous at-bats, and what he was going to do against the pitcher you brought in, which was Sergio Romo. And his batting average against Sergio Romo was way higher, Dan, way higher. He had not hit very well batting right-handed off of Javier Lopez. That was a huge mistake. Sergio comes in, gives up the 2-run, the double, and now the momentum is completely in the Chicago Cubs bullpen, in their dugout, and the Giants bullpen is just reeling at that point, okay? The next pitcher that came in, I believe, was Smith. He gave up the base hit, and then the bunt by Hayward. We could have had the double play. They brought in Strickland. He gives up the base hit, and the Cubs score 4 runs, and they're on their way to the National League Championship Series against the Dodgers, who won last night and beat the Washington Nationals, Dan. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. I know that you like the Cubs. You're from the Cubs, native, but do you think the Dodgers have any chance against the Cubs?
Yeah, they definitely have a chance. You have the best pitcher in baseball in Clayton Kershaw, and that's been a scrappy team, the Dodgers. Their bullpen isn't bad. Kenley Jansen's a good closer. They are definitely one of those pesky teams. I'd pick the Cubs to win that series just because I think the Cubs are the better team. But I think Dave Roberts has done a great job as manager, and I think that they can definitely give them a fight. I think it's going to be tough. But you brought up, Nick, the whole closing situation and the way Bochy uses relievers, and it's kind of a tough spot to be in because when you look at Bruce Bochy, he gets praised for his management of his bullpen. So it's kind of tough to then turn on him a little bit here. I'm not picking on you, just in general, just saying this idea that now his quick trigger is a bad thing. Well, that's part of who he is as a manager, and what's made him a good manager, why they've won 3 World Series, is he does have a quick trigger. I think when it comes down to this game, his bullpen, I don't think he was confident in any of them, especially after what happened in Game 3. I don't know how much each specific guy pitched the night before, but that might have impacted how much he wanted them to pitch. And I believe the Rizzo one, I thought that was more of a matchup when he put in Lopez, but I think his struggles there made him question if he wanted to keep him in. And then they had the one where they thought somebody else was pinch hitting before Contreras, pinch hit. I think it was just a tough spot for Bochy to be in because he just did not have the confidence in his bullpen.
Well, let me step in.
These playoff runs, I mean, that's been his strength has been his management of his bullpen, and this time it just didn't work out for him. I mean, usually it does. They tend to have this magic in the postseason, but even the best managers make their mistakes, and I think it just didn't work for him. I mean, you think Moore went 8 innings, and, you know, he doesn't have the reputation of a Bumgarner, which might have been why he didn't leave him in there at 120 pitches, which is a lot of pitches, and you'd think, you know, you could use your whole bullpen to just get you 3 outs, that it shouldn't be that difficult, but even getting a strike was becoming so hard for them, and I think Bruce Bochy just tried to find the best matchups and anything he could, trying to, you know, mix it up and using the amount of arms that he had.
Yeah, Danny, you bring up a good point. That you always keep me grounded, Dan. That's why I love talking with you, and you do a good job of keeping me grounded. But I'm going to tell you something, and I got DP here, David Perkins, and DP played baseball for me, and he'll tell you something, and I believe this because you said something, showing confidence in your players, Dan, and that's what Bochy did not do. And so every pitcher that came out of that bullpen was feeling the lack of confidence from Bruce Bochy. And I feel that, and I'm going to ask Perk, Dave, you played a lot of baseball. How did you feel when your coach was not have confidence in you? If you got up to bat and you felt like, oh, the coach thinks I'm going to strike out, how did that make you feel?
You were the coach.
Yeah, how did I make you feel?
I always felt great. I was up there. You had me batting cleanup or 8. So there's a little faith in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
and Danny, I believe that as
earlier?
What's that?
Wasn't there a thing earlier with Casilla and him thinking Bochy doesn't have any faith with him?
It absolutely happened, and that's why Casilla was not the closer anymore. He took him out of there, and I thought that was the right move. Casilla had not done very well, and if you can't keep throwing a guy out there, the fans turned on Casilla. He could not be the closer anymore. Boch did the right thing by finding another closer, but he didn't stick with Sergio. Sergio gave up the double there. He gave up the home run to Chris Bryant in the 9th inning the day before, and then he did go out and get the next couple of innings. Sergio pitched 2 innings on the 9th, the day before. So he pitched the 9th and the 10th.
You know, Nick, I'll tell you this about Bochy because he was out here in San Diego for a while. And when you talk to players who played under him with the Padres, he is the most liked manager. I mean, he just had the perfect rapport with his players. And I don't know what his relationship was with these guys, but these confidence things may have been built up over time. A lot of times when you're a manager, you might give a guys a lot of rope. You might give them the room that, hey, I believe the next time I put you in, you're going to do good or do well, and then you keep putting him in and he keeps messing up, and after a while you just throw your arms up and say, I don't know, I just got to go with what I think is going to give me the best chance of winning. And Romo, I mean, he was the closer back in 2012. I think that he had a little bit more leeway than other guys, and I'm sure like you said, any guy, if they feel like their coach or manager doesn't have confidence in any sport, it might make them struggle. I think there are other guys that it really pushes them to do more. And Bruce Bochy, with how successful he is, I mean, for me, sure, you could hurt their feelings a little bit, but his quick trigger is what's made him so big. I mean, I still remember in 2014, I believe it was, when Tim Hudson had a postseason game, he went like 3 innings, and the Giants still ended up winning the game because they just used their bullpen so masterfully. And I think that's the thing with Bruce Bochy is maybe he didn't show a lot of confidence in them, but that's just the way he does it. And if you're going to be a guy who always, sticks with pitchers for too long, that tends to burn you.
Well, it's a good point. Perk, you got something to add?
Well, yeah, and then Casilla, I mean, he was kind of throwing a little fit there, too, on the mound, wasn't he? So
yeah, he did a couple of times.
I'm sure that had something to do with it, too.
Yeah, you can
can't
never
show up the manager.
You can never show up the manager when you go out there. No no coach wants that, and the players don't like to see that either. It's bad for it's a bad look.
Fans really don't like to
it's
see
a
that.
bad look. So, hey, Danny, let's make a prediction on the American League playoff there between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Cleveland Indians. I mean, I think it would be pretty cool, Dan, if the Chicago Cubs and the Cleveland Indians got in the World Series. You got two teams that haven't won a World Series in a long time. So either team that won.
Yeah, they're the first and second when it comes to longest World Series drought. So I think that would definitely be the ideal one if you're kind of a sentimental person. I kind of like Toronto, though. I think the way they're playing is strong. As good as Cleveland looked against Boston, they have a few too many injuries. I think Toronto just looks right, especially after their postseason success last year. I like them. But, yeah, Cubs, Indians, I think that'd be perfect because the loser would have the record for the continuously longest World Series drought.
Yeah, that'd be fun, Dan. I'm going to be rooting for Cleveland just for that reason. I do like the offense of the Toronto Blue Jays. I think they're hitting the ball very well right now. Danny, when I was down there in San Diego with you, I'm a big Troy Tulowitzki guy and like to watch Troy play. Hey, Danny, thank you so much for joining us today here on the 10th inning. And I want you to go ahead and enjoy this baseball series. And if your Cubs can get to the World Series, I want to remind you, I picked the Cubs to win the World Series in the beginning of the season, especially after we were watching the Olympics. There was a lot of cool things that happened in the Olympics this year that had not been, broken, historical things that had not been done, and records that had not been broken for many years. And I said, I think this is the year for the Cubs, okay? A lot of mojo for that. And right now we're looking at it. The last World Series for the Cubs was 1908, and for the Cleveland Indians it was 1948. And the one right below that there was, we won't even bring that up. But Danny?
108 years.
Huh?
108 years.
Yeah.
108 years, old Perk.
Nick, just to be clear, just so any of my friends from Chicago know, I am a White Sox fan, so you can't call them my Cubs because I'm technically a Sox guy. But like most Chicagoans, or at least most normal Chicagoans, I'll pull for the Cubs in this situation. But they're not my Cubs.
Yeah, very good, Dan. Thank you so much, Dan. All right.
Yeah, anytime, Nick.
I want to thank Danny Reiter for joining us from San Diego's Mighty 1090. That's San Diego's sports leader. And you can listen to Danny Reiter Saturday mornings from 10 to 12:30. You can stream him online or go to the Mighty 1090. There's an app there. And check him out. Danny does a great job. He's one of the co-hosts Saturday mornings from 10 to 12:30. Well, thank you for joining us here tonight. We had a good time talking about the Chicago Cubs and the San Francisco Giants, and we're going to do some further podcasts, so keep an eye out for the 10th inning with Nick Mattos and my producer, D. Perk. Thanks for joining us.